back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we will be ending our Outlaws from Around the World series with a rather well-known American gangster, Al Capone.
Who? Oh, wait a minute. I think I have heard of him. Maybe once or twice.
Maybe. He's not really all that well known.
He's not a big name or anything. No.
No. I mean, it's not like he's one of the most infamous American gangsters.
Right, exactly.
So, as for his early life, Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17th of 1899 in Brooklyn, New York City. He was the son of Italian immigrants Gabriel and Teresa Capone.
Mm-hmm.
In his early life, his father was a barber and his mother was a seamstress. His family immigrated to the United States by ship sometime in 1893. The family initially settled at 95 Navy Street in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. However, when he was 11 years old, the family later moved to 38 Garfield Place in Park Slope, Brooklyn.
Ah, yes.
His parents had 8 other children, including Raphael Capone, also known as Ralph Capone.
Mm-hmm.
Or Bottles, it is a nickname, who later took charge of his brother's beverage industry.
Well, I guess that's where the Bottles came from. I get it. They were really big on those nicknames, though, in the mobs and stuff. It was kind of cool, but anyway.
So, there was also Salvatore Frank Capone, who also worked for his brother's criminal empire.
Right.
Al was remembered as showing a lot of promise while in school. However, he had trouble following the strict rules outlined by the Catholic school he attended.
Right.
His career at school ended at an age of 14 after he was expelled for hitting a female teacher in the face.
Oh my goodness.
Rather violent already.
I'd say so, yeah.
This does not bode well.
I don't know. I've heard some of those nuns were pretty bad, so I don't really know what she did, fair. But still. Well, we're going to hope it wasn't a nun. Maybe it was just a teacher at the school in general. But still, oh my goodness.
Yeah. He worked several odd jobs, including working at a candy store and a bowling alley. He had also played semi-professional baseball from 1916 to 1918.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
I did not either before this script. Or before this episode, whatever.
Right.
He later became influenced by the actions of Johnny Torrio, a man who helped the Chicago outfit in the 1920s, and later became a mentor to Capone.
Right.
Capone married May Josephine Coughlin. May? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. May Coughlin on December 30th of 1918, when he was 19. She had given birth to the couple's son, Albert Sonny Capone, earlier that same month. Sonny lost most of his hearing in his left ear and when he was only a child. Since Al was under the age of 21, his parents had to consent in writing to his marriage.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You had to be 21 to get married?
Yeah. Things have changed quite a bit.
That's nuts.
Then again, this was the early 1900s.
But still, yeah. You figure it would be a lot younger than that. But anyway, whatever.
Yeah, you would, considering it was allowable for people to get married at younger than that.
Maybe it was just because it's New York. Maybe that's it.
Maybe.
All right. But anyway.
So, by most accounts, the couple was actually happy. So, yeah. Says a lot for them compared to a lot of other couples, both then and now.
Right. Very true.
So, Al was involved in a few small-town gangsters during his younger years in New York, including the Junior 40 Thieves and the Bowery Boys.
Ooh.
He later joined the Brooklyn Rippers and also the well-known 5 Points Gang.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
I've heard a few of them, actually. I've heard the Bowery Boys, too. I've heard them mentioned on something before. But anyway.
The 5 Points Gang was based at that time in Lower Manhattan, so, yeah.
Right.
Rather local.
Right.
During this time, he was also mentored and employed by a fellow racketeer who was a man named Frankie Yale. While working at Yale, or working for Yale.
Yeah.
It says at in the script. I got confused for a second.
Sorry.
So, while working for Yale, Capone got his well-known nickname of Scarface a name that he actually loathed. While working at Yale's Coney Island dance hall and a saloon, Alice supposedly insulted a woman. This led to her brother, who was accompanying her, to pull a knife, slashing at Capone's face 3 times. Capone later in life was known to hide the left side of his face in photos, and he later claimed that the scars had come from a war injury.
Yeah, I've heard that he had a mouth on him. I mean, really, so,
It seems like, I remember that being one of his most defining traits.
No, he was not afraid to say certain things, but anyway.
So sometime in 1919, Al decided to leave New York and head to Chicago after receiving an invitation from a former associate named Torrio, who had gone to work for a notorious crime boss in that area, a man named James Big Jim Colosimo, or Colosimo, whatever. Colosimo, yeah. Torrio worked as an enforcer for Big Jim. Capone worked as a bouncer at a brothel as well, which is also where he is thought to have contracted syphilis.
Ah, yes.
Which later contributed to his death. This is made even worse by the fact that he could have sought treatment and taken antibiotics that could have cured the affliction, but he didn't. In 1924, Capone's name began appearing in varying newspaper articles in which he was listed as a boxing promoter. On May 11th of 1920, Torrio took over Colosimo's crime empire after Colosimo's death. Something that Capone was attributed to being involved in.
Ah, so he helped him move up the ladder, huh?
I would not doubt it.
I'm assuming so.
So Torrio's group was made up mainly of Italian Americans, and with Capone as his right-hand man, he grew it to be the largest in Chicago at that time.
Good God, that's saying something.
Yeah, that is very impressive.
That was known as a hotbed of criminal activity. So yeah.
So Torrio was known to try to negotiate between rival gangs to set up agreements on territories and the like. A small gang that was loyal to Torrio, known as the Jenna Brothers, started putting pressure on a rival gang in regards to some territorial disputes. Due to the Jenna Brothers' loyalty, this led Torrio to arrange the murder of O'Banion.
O'Banion
was leader of that gang. Right. Yeah. So O'Banion was killed at his flower shop on November 10th, 1924. His death allowed a man named Jaime Weiss, or Weiss, whatever, depending on his nationality. I'm assuming German.
I don't know. It sounds sort of like it, but I'm not sure.
Weiss is a typical German name. Anyways, Jaime, to take leadership of the gang. Weiss was also backed up by Vincent Drucci and Bugs Moran.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. Bugs Moran is a rather...
Yeah, I've heard of him, definitely. So he's
common,
a big name.
not common, but well-known name.
He's another one that's big, yeah.
Weiss is a close friend of O'Banion, or was, I guess, close friend of O'Banion, which made him thirsty for revenge. In an ambush that took place in January of 1925, Torrio was shot several times. He and Capone, who was accompanying him on a shopping trip, both survived.
Good God.
Though Capone was left shaken by the ordeal.
I imagine so. Good grief.
After Torrio recovered, he resigned and handed over the reins, so to speak, to Capone, who was only 26 at the time.
So he's like, I'm out, man. They've just shot me up. I'm done.
I do not blame him.
Nope.
At all, even remotely.
I tip my hat to you, sir. It's all yours.
So... Capone was now at the helm of a large crime family, and at the time, the largest, that had illegal breweries and a transportation network that reached to Canada.
Yep.
As well as having political and law enforcement protection.
Yep.
Capone wasted no time in implementing violence as a means to increase profits. If a speakeasy refused to use Capone's liquor, the business would often find itself being either blown up or burned down. It's reported that as many as 100 people died in these explosions and bombings.
Yep. They didn't care.
And they did not, no.
They didn't. It was ridiculous. They'd line you up in the street and just gun you down. I mean, they did not care. It was crazy. But anyway.
So he also recruited help from the African-American community, asking several black jazz musicians to perform in his business. Capone was said to have been a huge jazz fan and had asked clarinetist Johnny Dodds, to play a song that he did not know. Capone then took a $100 bill and ripped it in half, giving Dodds one half of the bill and promising him the other half when he learned it.
Oh, God.
So, Al was known to indulge himself, opting for custom-made suits, expensive cigars, gourmet food and drink, and he loved to indulge his, let's say, carnal nature with the company of a slew of women.
Right.
He was well known for his flashy and expensive jewelry.
Right.
When he was questioned about his lavish lifestyle, he was known to reply with lines like, "I'm just a businessman, giving people what they want, and all I do is satisfy a public demand." He based himself in Cicero, Illinois, and after he spent a large amount of money on bribes to take over town council elections, which made it very difficult for the North Side gang to target him, which was another gang at the time.
Right.
So during this time, Capone's driver was found tortured and murdered, and there was an attempt to kill Vice, who, as mentioned earlier, was the new leader of the Northsiders.
Right.
On September 20th of 1926, the Northsiders were able to set up a plan in which they would lure Capone outside of his headquarters, and they got him to go to the Hampton Inn with the hopes of being able to shoot through the numerous windows.
Right.
Soon after his arrival, several carloads of gangsters and outlaws pulled up in front of the inn and opened fire using Thompson submachine guns and shotguns.
As you do.
Oh, yeah.
These things apparently were just laying around. Everybody had them back then.
So, here's the kicker about this. Mr. Capone was completely uninjured during the attack.
It's kind of funny.
And decided to call for a truce. However, his pleas for peace fell on deaf ears. Capone became more and more worried by the growing tensions between the gangs, which led him to take a lot of precautions, including impromptu trips. I don't blame him.
Nope.
Capone was said to have just shown up unannounced to one of Chicago's train depots and would then buy tickets for an entire Pullman sleeper car on a night train.
Those things were fancy.
They're not cheap.
No, they were fancy. Tell you, they had like they were like they were really fancy cars. Go ahead.
So this train was either headed to Cleveland, Omaha, Kansas City, Little Rock, or Hot Springs, wherever he wanted.
Through him. Okay.
So once they arrived at their location, they would spend the next week living in luxury. They rented the most lavish hotel suites and ate at the finest restaurants.
Of course.
In November of 1925, Antonio Lombardo, who was Capone's consigliere, or however that's pronounced, which was essentially a high-ranking member of the crime family and Capone's personal advisor, he was named head of the Union Siciliana, I believe is how that's pronounced.
Right.
Which was a Sicilian-American organization that had become corrupted by gangsters.
Yeah, sadly.
The appointment of Lombardo infuriated a fellow gangster named Joe Aiello, who had wanted to get the position himself.
Right.
He also believed that Lombardo only got the position due to Capone's connections. Probably.
Yeah.
That's typically how things worked.
Yeah. Back then especially, it was very, very corrupt. Not saying it's not still, but it was even worse, I think, the way they describe things. But anyway.
It very much makes it seem like it was.
It was.
So this led Aiello to sever all personal and business ties with Lombardo and to enter into a feud with Capone. So Aiello quickly allied himself with several of Capone's enemies. He soon began developing plans to get rid of both of his enemies, Lombardo and Capone. Starting in the spring of 1927, several attempts were made on their lives. Aiello offered the chef at Bella Napoli Cafe to put prussic acid into Capone's soup. However, the chef instead informed Capone of the scheme, which led Capone to send men into Aiello's bakery. The men opened fire with machine guns, firing more than 200 bullets into the bakery.
God.
That is a lot of bullets.
That's a lot of bullets.
So, here's the thing. Aiello wasn't in there.
Oh, no. I could never see this upcoming in any scenario.
The only person injured, or that it says was injured, in this attack was Aiello's brother, Antonio. So, I don't see how that's going to cause any problems later on.
No, Well, he's already mad at him. Now you've shot his brother. So, yeah.
Doesn't say he's dead, just said he was injured.
Right.
But
still,
yeah.
You've shot him. Hurt him. Okay.
There's no way this could be taken horribly at all.
No, I can't see why.
So, during the summer and fall of 1927, several hitmen were hired by Aiello to kill Lombardo and Capone. However, they kept turning up dead. So, I'm beginning to think this is not a man you want to mess with.
I don't think so.
He seems to have a lot of connections.
He does.
It was estimated that at least 10 men attempted to collect the $50,000 bounty being offered for killing Capone.
God, that's a lot, though.
Yeah.
Back then, that's a lot of money.
None of them survived to collect the prize or even complete the deed, as they say.
Well, that's 10.
Yeah.
10.
Plus the countless men before who tried to kill him.
Exactly. So, that's a lot. Okay.
So, sometime in November of 1927, Aiello set up a series of machine gun ambushes all across Lombardo's home and a cigar shop that was frequented often by Capone. The plan was foiled, however, when police were tipped off about the upcoming ambush. Law enforcement then raided several addresses and arrested Angelo Lamantio, along with 4 other gunmen. After discovering receipts in Lamantio's pockets, he then confessed that he had been hired by Aiello to kill Lombardo and Capone. The police then arrested Aiello and brought him in to the South Clark Street police station. After learning of his arrest, Capone sent approximately 24 armed men to stand guard outside the station and await his release.
Oh my God! This man's got some balls. But anyway, go ahead.
To be fair, he probably has the cops in his pocket
he does, I'm sure.
At least like half of the station.
Yes, probably. They were very corrupt.
Actually, he probably has more than half the state under his pocket.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Or in his pocket.
I wouldn't doubt it.
So, the men didn't even try to conceal the reason that they were there, which led onlookers and reporters to rush to the scene hoping to get photos or reports of what was shaping up to be a very bloody scene for Aiello.
Y'all.
So, police managed to actually get Aiello from the police station unscathed and then escort him to a safe location. He missed his later court dates, with his attorney claiming he had suffered a nervous breakdown. Honestly, I wouldn't blame him if that is true.
Don't say no, y'all.
He then supposedly went into hiding, living with family members in Trenton, New Jersey, where he continued his campaign against Capone and Lombardo.
I think he may just need to leave them alone. It didn't sound like it worked out well for him, sadly.
So, moving on from that, it has been widely assumed that Capone was responsible for ordering the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929.
Yep.
Although he was actually being held at his Florida home at the time, but that means absolutely nothing.
Don't mean shit, no. Exactly. They had ways of getting word out.
Oh, yeah. So the massacre took place as a way to eliminate rival Bugs Moran, who was the leader of the North Side Gang at the time.
Right.
He had become the leader after former leaders were killed, regarding the hostility over Dean O'Banion's death.
Right. They're still all pissed off about that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
So, while the motivation for the massacre isn't completely clear, it's thought that it was in retaliation for the theft of some very expensive whiskey that was being illegally brought in from Canada via the Detroit River.
Right. So, somebody held up one of their little deliveries, you might say, and stole the goods, which is really smart. But anyway, go ahead.
So, this was during the time of Prohibition, which meant that all alcohol was illegal and only allowed to, or which only allowed people like Capone to thrive.
Well, of course, because people weren't going to go along with that.
Oh, no.
Good God. It was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Not to mention, he owned, I'm pretty sure, all the speakeasies.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of these freaking millionaires, these families are rich now. Yeah. They've got, the Kennedys and stuff were supposed to have been back in those days. But anyway, whatever, go ahead. Here we are.
So, Capone's men rented an apartment across from a trucking warehouse located at 2122 North Clark Street, which served as Moran's headquarters. The men stayed for a while, monitoring the other group's movements and routines. On the morning of February 14th of 1929, Capone's lookout signaled to 4 gunmen who were disguised as police officers to initiate a quote-unquote raid.
Mm-hmm.
The fake cops then lined 7 men up against the wall, then signaled for their accomplices to shoot. All of the men were killed, including Moran.
Good God.
Yeah. Capone received a summons a few days later to testify before a Chicago grand jury on charges of federal prohibition violations. However, he claimed he was too unwell to attend.
Well.
So, to clean up his image, he then donated money to a few local charities and soup kitchens.
Mm-hmm.
However, the massacre led to public outcry about the mayor's alliance with Capone.
Well, I imagine so. These people were literally just took out in the street, gunned down.
Yeah. Just executed whenever
right
he wanted.
Freaking street. I mean, yeah, in front of everybody. It was bad.
So, as you can imagine, this led to a new mayor being elected when election time came around.
Well, yeah, I could see that coming.
So, in May of 1929, one of Capone's bodyguards, Frank Rio, was able to uncover a plot by 3 of Capone's men.
Mm-hmm.
These men were Albert Anselmi, John Scalise, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right, Scalise, and Joseph Guinta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you can tell, I'm not good at pronouncing these Italian names. I don't know how to. I'm just guessing. I looked up a few of them, but anyways, with that little disclaimer out a bit too late, these men were approached by Aiello to kill Capone and then take over the Chicago outfit.
Uh-huh. Well, that should be easy to do right there.
Oh, yeah, this has worked out so well.
Doesn't seem like anybody had any issues killing Capone so far.
So, upon learning of this betrayal, Capone beat the men with baseball bats before ordering his loyal bodyguards to shoot them. Yeah, the baseball bats thing is a bit on brand because he's a baseball player and all that. So, yeah. Worked out for them about as well as you'd expect.
Yeah.
About as well as it's worked out for literally everyone else that has ever tried to kill him.
Exactly.
So some say that this story was exaggerated and that likely Capone had one of his enforcers take care of the men, but others claim he was present and took part in the incident personally. I would not doubt either one of those claims.
No, I wouldn't either. He was supposed to have been pretty aggressive, in situations like that where he had backup. He was supposed to have been pretty bad, but I don't know either. Wasn't there. Doesn't matter.
No, it does not. So after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Walter A. Strong, who was publisher for the Chicago Daily News, asked for help from President Herbert Hoover. A memoir written by Hoover in 1952 states Chicago was in the hands of the gangsters. The police and the magistrates were completely under their control, that the federal government was the only force by which the city's ability to govern itself could be restored. At once, I directed that all of the federal agencies concentrate on Mr. Capone and his allies. So the meeting organized by Hoover led to a multi-agency attack on Capone. In 1930, after repeated attempts on his life by Aiello, Capone had finally had enough and vowed to finally get rid of him. In the weeks leading up to Aiello's death, Capone's men tracked him. They tracked him to Rochester, New York, where he had connections. They initially planned to kill him there, however, he managed to return to Chicago before they could complete their plan.
Right.
Aiello was getting worn down by this time. He was having to remain constantly on the run, and he had lost several powerful gang members. I wonder why.
Yeah.
So Aiello set up residence at the Chicago apartment of the Union Siciliana treasurer.
Right.
Pasquale Pazzi Presto Prestigiacomo, which was located at 205 North Culmer Avenue. So while exiting the building to get into a cab on October 23rd, 1930, Aiello was gunned down. A gunman from the second floor building across the street began to open firing on him with a submachine gun. Shooting him at least 13 times.
Good grief.
Before his body then toppled off the steps of the building and pulled himself around the corner, attempting to get out of the line of fire.
He's been shot 13 times.
And he's trying to crawl away around the corner.
Okay, so he's around the corner now, getting out of the line of fire.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Should be good now, right?
Sadly, no.
Oh, okay.
He moved directly into the range of a second gunman.
Oh, God.
Who was on the third floor of another apartment building located on the block.
So he ran around the corner, and there's another one up on that side, on that street. Oh, my gosh.
Capone covered his bases, so to speak.
Yeah, he had all the exits and everything covered, probably, yes. If he tried to make a getaway, somebody else would get him.
So, it was at that moment that he met his end. The Treasury and Justice Departments orchestrated plans for tax income prosecutions against various Chicago gangsters. A small elite squad of agents from the Prohibition Bureau, whose members included the infamous Elliot Ness.
Yeah, I remember him.
Were deployed to find bootleggers.
Yep.
The squad was said to be incorruptible in a city used to corruption, which led them to be nicknamed the Untouchables.
Yep.
So on March 27th of 1929, Capone was arrested by FBI agents as he left a Chicago courtroom after testifying to a grand jury. He was charged with contempt of court due to faking an illness to avoid an earlier appearance.
Oh, God.
So later, on May 16th of 1929, he was again arrested in Philadelphia for carrying a concealed weapon.
I don't believe he would have ever done that.
Oh, no.
Sounds completely out of character.
Absolutely. On the next day, he was indicted by a grand jury, with a trial soon taking place. He was later sentenced to 1 year in prison. On August 8th of 1929, he was sent to Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary. He was released in March of 1930, and a week after his release, he was listed as Public Enemy Number 1 on the unofficial Chicago Crime Commission's list.
Okay.
In April of 1930, he was again arrested for vagrancy charges while visiting Miami Beach. The governor had ordered local law enforcement to run him out of the state, and he claimed while being held that the Miami police had refused to give him food or water, and that they had threatened his family.
Possible.
That is very possible.
Very possible. I mean,
So for making these accusations, he was charged with perjury.
Okay.
But was acquitted after a 3-day trial that was held in July of 1930.
Well.
In September, a Chicago jury issued a warrant for his arrest, again on charges of vagrancy, which is a bit odd considering a vagrant is essentially a homeless person who relied on begging or something similar to support themselves.
Right.
So it seems like the legal system's kind of playing a bit dirty here.
It is. I'm thinking he's just out on the beach or something. I don't know, because that's what vagrancy normally is, and he's like staying in these massive hotel suites, luxurious. You know what I mean? So yeah, it is kind of comical. They're just trying to get him in jail. That's it. Keep harassing him and he'll leave. That's it.
That's what they're trying to do. Yeah,
they just want him out of Miami or whatever, or anywhere he's at.
They just want him out of the world.
Well,
out of this life.
That too.
So, as you can figure, nothing really came of these trials or sentences, as he had remained free during the time.
Right.
Because nothing they tried to pin on him would stick, because it's all bull.
And he'd keep it tied up with lawyers and court.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of crap, right?
So, Mabel Walker Willebrandt, who was the U.S. Assistant Attorney General at the time, is claimed to be the person who initially came up with the plan to charge obviously wealthy crime figures with tax evasion. This would be based on their very lavish lifestyles, which were supported by unknown and unreported sources of income.
True.
Which, that's why many criminal organizations used money laundering schemes to make the money they gained from criminal activity appear to be legitimate money.
Exactly. So they own all these little businesses, and they make it look like they're losing money or making all this money, Yeah. Exactly.
So the key component to Capone's eventual conviction was his inability to prove his income, which means he could not say where he was getting all of his money. His brother, Ralph, was sentenced to 18 months for tax evasion, which Capone hoped to avoid. As so, he advised his lawyer to essentially pay the taxes he owed. His lawyer complied with this request. However, he was left in a very tough position of showing where the money they were declaring as income come from.
Mm-hmm.
He admitted Capone had an income of $100,000 for the years of 1928 and 1929.
Mm-hmm.
On March 13th of 1931, Capone was charged with tax evasion for the year 1924. This was done by a secret grand jury. Later, on June 5th of 1931, Capone was indicted by a federal grand jury on 22 counts of income tax evasion between 1925 and 1929. That is a lot.
That's a lot.
So he was later released on a $50,000 bail.
That's a lot, too.
Yes.
Back then.
Even now.
Well, yeah.
So he was later released, and he was later indicted on 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act.
Oh, Lord.
Which was essentially breaking the prohibition laws.
Right.
5,000 violations.
Yep. That's a lot. That's more than a few, definitely.
Just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
At the Chicago Federal Building, Capone pleaded guilty to income tax evasion and all 5,000 of the Volstead Act violations. He did this as part of a plea deal that would only give him a 2.5-year sentence in prison. However, the judge refused to honor the plea. So much for being honorable.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
So, on July 30th of 1931, the judge decided that the 1930 letter would not be allowed into evidence and overruled objections from his lawyer that would allow him to testify on behalf of his client.
Right.
Capone was later tried on the tax evasion charges, which were thought to take precedence over the Volstead charges. Evidence was presented that included witnesses and ledgers that strongly implied Capone was the controller of the criminal empire. However, it was never stated or written down outright.
Right.
Capone's lawyers, who were relying on the plea deal that was not honored, were left with only a few hours to prepare for the trial, which, as imagined, led to a very weak defense.
Yep.
The defense was focused on claiming that all the income earned was lost to gambling, which made no sense as gambling losses would need to be deducted from gambling winnings, which were not reported.
All right.
This was further made to look ridiculous when it was compared to the expenses of Capone, which far exceeded what he was reporting being able to support. The judge allowed for proof of Capone's excessive spending to be presented at great length.
I imagine so.
He was charged with the evasion of $215,000 in taxes on a total income of $1,038,654.
Ooh.
Which was accumulated during the period of 1924 and 29.
That's a lot of money back then.
That's a lot of money. And now.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of money now. But back then, that would have been a crap lot of money.
Oh, yeah. So he was convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion on October 17th of 1931. A week later, he was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, along with being fined $50,000 plus $7,692 for court costs, and of course was held liable for the $215,000 in back taxes plus interest.
Right.
So, new lawyers who were tax experts were hired to represent Capone. They filed a writ of habeas corpus that was based on a Supreme Court ruling that tax evasion was not fraud, which meant that Capone had been convicted on charges relating to years that were actually outside the time limit of prosecution.
Right.
However, a judge interpreted the law so that the time that Capone had spent in Miami was subtracted from the age of offenses, because of course they did.
Mm-hmm.
This denied the appeal of both Capone's conviction and sentence.
Right.
As for his imprisonment, Capone was sent to Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary sometime in May of 1932 when he was 33 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Upon arriving, he was diagnosed with syphilis and gonorrhea.
Oh, gosh.
That is awful.
That's awful.
He was also experiencing withdrawal symptoms from his cocaine addiction. An addiction that had led to the perforation of his nasal septum because, that's what happens.
It happens.
He was said to be adept at the job he was assigned, which was stitching the soles on shoes for 8 hours a day. However, he was seen as a weak personality and was described as being totally out of his depth and from having no idea how to deal with the constant bullying he received from his fellow inmates. His cellmate, a man named Red Rudinsky, who was a small-time criminal that had been associated with the Capone gang, decided to become a protector of Capone.
Okay.
The protection offered fueled suspicion that Capone was getting special treatment, and while there was no evidence to support this, Capone was moved to the then newly opened Alcatraz.
Oh.
You gotta feel bad for him at this point.
Yeah.
Despite all the crap he's done, that's cruel.
Alcatraz must have been pretty bad. Pretty bad.
That was very bad, just from what we know. The group gave, or rather, for his good behavior, he was allowed to play banjo in the Alcatraz prison band. Which was later known as the Rock Islanders.
Oh, my word.
The group gave regular Sunday concerts for other inmates.
That's kind of funny.
It is, very much so.
Capone played the banjo at Alcatraz.
Yep. During this time, Capone's health and mental capacity had declined rapidly due to his illnesses. He was formally diagnosed with neurosyphilis in February of 1938.
Yeah, it attacks the brain. It's bad. It's really bad.
It really is. So his last year spent at Alcatraz was in the hospital section, where he remained confused and disoriented.
It's kind of sad.
It is. He completed his sentence on January 6th of 1939. However, this led to him being sent to the Federal Correctional Institution at Terminal Island to serve his sentence for contempt of court.
Oh, yeah, that contempt of court from way back when. Oh, my God.
He was paroled on November 16th of the same year after his wife, May, appealed to the court for his release due to his declining mental capacity.
True.
So the main thing that came about due to Capone's conviction was that his position was left up for grabs. This allowed his underboss, Frank Nitti, who was the person directly under the boss of the organization, to take over. After his release from prison in March of 1932, having been convicted of his own tax evasion charges. So the gang continued without much trouble from the Chicago police, as the newly led group had a much lower level of open violence.
So they kind of toned it down a little at this point.
Yep. So after Capone's release from prison in November of 1939, he was referred to the Johns Hopkins Hospital for treatment. However, due to his less than stellar reputation, Johns Hopkins refused to treat him.
Okay.
I didn't realize that was allowable.
I guess it is. I didn't know either, but I have no clue. That was back then, man. I've been to some of the laws there are now, too.
However, Union Memorial Hospital allowed him treatment. Capone was so grateful for the kind and compassionate care he received while there that he donated 2 Japanese weeping cherry trees to the hospital. On March 20th of 1940, a very sick Capone left Baltimore and headed to his home in Palm Island, Florida.
Right.
Later, in 1942, after mass production of penicillin had started in the U.S., Capone was one of the first patients to receive the new medicine. Sadly, it had been too late to reverse the damage that had been done to his brain, although it did help slow the overall progression of the disease.
I guess that's good, if that nothing else.
Yeah. He was examined in 1946 by his physician as well as a Baltimore psychiatrist, both of which concluded Capone had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old.
That is sad.
His remaining days were spent at his Palm Island home, where he spent time with his family. On January 21st of 1947, he had suffered a stroke.
Right.
However, he was able to regain consciousness and seemed to be improving until he attracted bronchopneumonia.
No.
On January 22nd, he suffered from a heart attack, and on January 25th, he passed away, surrounded by his family. His body was transferred back to Chicago approximately a week after his death, and a private funeral service was held. Originally, he was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, which is in Chicago. However, sometime in 1950, Capone's remains, along with his father Gabriel and his brother Frank, were moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. This ends the tale of Al Capone.
Definitely an interesting one, because that was a crazy time to be alive. And definitely disturbed time to be alive, because good grief, I mean, the stuff that was normal is just out there.
Oh, absolutely.
I couldn't imagine living in some of those cities. God, it would have been awful. People who weren't involved in crimes and stuff.
I imagine that would be close to what hell is like.
It would have been, because you would have been fearing for your life all the time, just trying to live your life as a normal person, you know.
Yeah. When at any moment you could just be dragged out in the street and shot for
or
no reason.
or just shot through your window or something.
Or shot through the window.
Or on the street because they were driving by and shooting people.
Yeah. In which case that would put in danger a lot of other innocent people, maybe even your family. God, that must have been a nightmare time and place to be alive.
It would have been. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed this series. We're going to be picking up with talking about some of the most disturbing human experiments that have been done throughout history. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to stay disturbed.